Welcome to another episode of Round Trip Death. I just wanted to give everybody kind of a heads up today. Some of the guests that we have on have rougher stories than others, and today's is one of the roughest. Not every story is easy to listen to, but I feel strongly like someone needs to hear this today. Now let's get right to our guest. We are going across the pond again today, and we have Jack Gregory with us. Jack, how are you?
Good evening. I'm good, thank you. Great to be here.
Jack, we lately have had really a lot of nice podcasts with beautiful stories of tunnels and white light and all kinds of these beautiful NDEs. And I'm just warning our audience, this one is not as pleasant today.
No.
But I think it's important that we hear all kinds of experiences. And before we jump in, why don't you tell us a little bit about you? You had a little rough upbringing as well.
So I grew up in a small town in West Yorkshire, a small mining town. I grew up during the miners' riots when Prime Minister, in her infinite wisdom, decided that it was cheaper to buy coal from foreign places. So all our miners lost our jobs and the town never recovered. I was told when I was 8, I was adopted, and that's where my life became difficult, messy, broken. And I spent many, many years just riding on the wave of that, really, and trying to find my place in society, which I really struggled to do.
So how did that affect you and your family life?
So, as I said, I remember it was my 8th birthday. I was sat at my mum's knee, and she told me that her and my dad loved me very much, but I didn't actually, until then, belong to them. I was adopted. And for most people, I guess, they would take some niceness out of that, knowing that they're loved by someone, but that it was the totally opposite for me. And I lost my identity. I didn't know who I was. I thought I knew who I was. I was already different. I already felt different to other people. I couldn't read or write very well, and I was seen as the special child. I was seen as a bit thick. The school system that I grew up in called me mildly retarded and said that I would never, ever really amount to anything. So, yeah, it was like everything went for me. So I just, I started to make my own worlds in my imagination, and I started to pretend to be other people because I didn't know who I was. So I could be anybody I wanted to be.
So did you move out of the house at a young age?
So I guess I was 17 when I moved out of the house. I used to go see my nana over in the next town, and, I used to love going over there, and I got on really well. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had a very loving family, and I was brought up in a nice home. And despite the town not being very affluent, my dad was a civil engineer and my mum was a social worker, so I always had whatever I wanted. And, and I grew up in a nice house on a nice estate. I would go over to my nana's house, and they were more, it was more austerity over there, what they call council estates. I guess you would call them projects. And, I spent some time over there, but I loved my nana, but I always felt different. And they were always trying to get me to find my family and marry a family. And at that time, I didn't really want to do it. But I moved into a bedsit in that town. A lot of the people that I went to school with came from that town. My school life, I grew up in the special school system of the UK, which isn't or wasn't back then very easy to navigate. There was no such thing really as dyslexia. Certainly nothing like ADHD or they didn't have the understanding of autism and things like that and neurodivergency. So I was just seen as stupid and thick, but I always had a head for facts and knowledge, and I was great with words. My head was filled with words, and I couldn't get them out fast enough. But within the school system, I was abused physically and sexually by the teachers, bullied by the other kids because I was different, passed around to different people and told that nobody would ever believe me because of this world that I'd created in my head. I began to tell lies because, I could, because it was who I wanted to be. And I could tell anybody that I was anything. Yeah, I was abused awfully.
Really rough. So rough upbringing. At what point did you get into drugs?
So I got into drugs at school. One thing I was really good at was running, and the school that I went to was in the middle of a countryside, so it was like a mile in any direction to any part of the town. And I quickly found that I could make a lot of money. I was good at the 1,500 meters. I could do a mile in just over 7.5 minutes. So I could run things like dope and knock off bootleg VHS, knock off CDs, towards the end of it. I think the first one that I ever did was Fatherland at Prodigy. And I could make a lot of money. And I used to drink cheap cider, smoke a lot of dope. And, I drank a lot. I found myself in various anonymous meetings by the time I was 14 years old, and that was through social services of the day, and I had a sponsor that was friends with some of the teachers at the school. So I was bounced around between them all, trafficked around them sexually, and they took my innocence. I couldn't talk about it for such a long time. It's only over the past couple of years that I've been able to sort of look into my past like that. I did drugs on and off. I left school at 16. And
a lot of self-medication.
A lot of self-medication, smoking cigarettes, hashish. This is before like weed, really, because hashish was cheaper. It came in via the North Sea and then down through the towns. A lot of the towns then fell into heroin addiction because that was the next cheap drug. I had my first hit of heroin at 14. I didn't like it much. I always preferred cocaine and crack cocaine and amphetamines and things like that. The only downer that I ever really took was alcohol and dope. So I'd moved into a small bedsit in the town that I went to school in, hung around with some of the people that I went to school with, and I really fell into sort of addiction. I had a guy that lived above me in the Masonettes, and his name was Darren. Darren lives here, and he became my first mentor. You could see that there was this poet trying to get out, but really struggling. So he would teach me to sort of get by in reading and writing. I remember once he took me from my flat, locked my flat up, carried me upstairs. This is a 6'4", 20-stone guy. Took me into his spare bedroom, locked the door. He put wood over the door and made me go through cold turkey. And he sat there and held me as I went through cold turkey for 2 or 3 days.
Wow.
I loved him dearly. He passed away in October 1999 due to a really bad road traffic accident. He'd actually survived it, and he was getting better. He'd smashed his pelvis to pieces, and he was in the hospital. He was walking, and he said one day, "I'm tired. went to bed and he never woke up, and we lost him. I lost my best friend. My big brother. And things started to fall apart very, very quickly. I had a guy who I used to hang about with called Carl. Loved him like a brother too, and we used to go out on the blitz together. And we went out on Thursday, I think it was, and we had 8.5 ecstasy each. And we drunk and had just an almighty long weekend. And we were walking back, and we came up to a railway crossing. I had a joint in my mouth, and he took this joint out, and he took a Marmite blast, and then he stuck it back in my mouth. He went, "I love you," and he ran and vaulted the railroad gates and threw himself in front of the train, and there was nothing that I could do. I remember people holding me as I was beating down on the concrete, hands bloodied and just screaming. So I just went into myself and I took whatever I could, and I tried suicide, and I didn't manage that, and I would wind people up to try to get them to murder me. And in the end, I had a friend that lived in Portsmouth, which is way down south, and I moved away from my West Yorkshire town and I moved to Portsmouth.
And I know at one point you got sick, you got pneumonia that led to your near-death experience. How old were you then?
So that was only 9 years, coming up to 9 years ago.
Okay. Go ahead and tell us about that.
I'd had a good life here. I'd got married, I'd had children, and, my marriage ended because of I couldn't handle my own trauma. I wasn't using or drinking, I wasn't taking drugs, but I couldn't handle my own trauma, and I was sort of dry for a long time. And, infidelity, I would cheat on my wife, and I would, the marriage ended, so I used that as an excuse to go out back on the blitz. And I went back out for a good 2-3 years, to which I found myself homeless, street homeless, addicted to crack cocaine, suffering from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma 3 times while I was on the street, going through chemotherapy, walking 14 miles a day just to have a relationship with my children, and everything just started coming to a close. I tried to kill myself. I tried to shoot myself, and the gun jammed, and I didn't know what to do, and I found myself just broke, and nobody would listen. I would sit there, I would rock, I would talk to myself. I'd been involved in a church that was more of a cult. They said, we love you, your family, but when I got made homeless, they would even buy me a sandwich. So I was bitter, full of resentment, full of hate and hurt. I was contemplating going out and doing crime just to end up back in jail so I could have a warm, a warm cell and a roof over my head and food in my belly. I just didn't know what to do. I couldn't function. I'd kind of been sort of staying at in this guy's spare room, and he wasn't good for me, and we did a lot of drugs together, and we'd go out and do crime together, and I was losing everything. I was losing my daughter, and so I found myself at a food bank one Friday morning. They had this coffee morning, and I would go there, and I met this woman who was lovely. She was serving behind the counter. She had a 2-month-old boy. Her husband had left her, but she was serving at the food bank. And we started talking, and she took me out for, despite being told not to, she took me out for food, and she bought me tobacco and, a blanket and stuff like that. And she was, and then I didn't see her for ages. And I was just going more and more into this spiral of self-destruction, hate, and just I was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And on the 26th of June 2014, I found myself sat in a crack house, and I couldn't do it anymore. 10 o'clock at night, and I'm sat there, and I said, God, I don't even know if you exist anymore. But if you do, either take my life or take away this hunger, take away this thirst for drugs, because I can't live like this anymore. It's killing me. And I took an almighty hit on this crack pipe. And I don't know if your listeners know anything about crack cocaine, but the last thing you want to do is sleep. But I fell asleep, and I woke up at 4 minutes past 12 in the morning on the 27th of June 2014, and I haven't used a day since. And I started, getting better and helping out at this food bank and I'd been going to a church in the town that I'm now living. I'd started dating Jo, who is now my wife. And I just started getting better, and I started looking at my trauma. But on March the 9th, 2015, I'd been ill for a few days. I'd picked up a cough. I'd lost a load of weight. I was 6 stone. So you're looking at about 78, 80 pounds. And I was just getting iller. I couldn't keep down food. I had this really bad cough, this really bad wheeze. I woke up on the Sunday morning after only about 45 minutes sleep. And I said, I can't do this. I need to go to the hospital. So I rang my ex-wife and said, can you come and get my daughter? Because I've got to go to hospital. I'm really sick. And she said, I'll come and get you in a little while, and I'll take you, and we'll drop you off so she can see that that you're all right. And that's the last I would see her for a month. I got there about 20 past 4 in the afternoon. By 7:30, I was dead.
You mean clinically dead?
Clinically dead, 4 minutes. I had type 2 lung failure. I had double pneumonia. I had tuberculosis. I had pleurisy. I had an environmental disease that I hadn't seen in about 80 years, all because of the crap that I'd put into my system for the past few years. And, I'd managed to get clean, but it had done my body some real damage. And going to chemotherapy while you're still on drugs for other things, it's not good, really. So it really damaged my body. And, I passed away for 4 minutes, and I went to hell. And I'm not saying that Jesus sent me to hell or God sent me to hell, because that's not how it works. God doesn't send you to hell. Jesus doesn't send you to hell. He died so we, don't have to. But I hadn't accepted him in my life. I was going to church, but I wanted to still be naughty. Or I wanted at least that option of still being a bit naughty, and not being a Mr. Goody Two-Shoes, as I thought. I couldn't. So I hadn't accepted him. And I ended up in hell. And it felt like months. And I had this, I was shown bits of my life. Every time I'd messed up, I was shown it. I was being tormented. So when they brought me back, my mind was broken. And because I was on strong drugs as well, that they had me on, I had this complete and utter psychological breakdown, complete spiritual breakdown.
And physically, you were a mess with everything going on.
I was, like I say, I was 6 stone, and I emaciated. I could barely walk. I couldn't eat. I went mute for a while.
How long were you at the hospital?
But I was in the hospital for 2 months. When I came out of when I came back from hell, and I had this psychological breakdown, I was convinced that I'd bred this super virulent form of tuberculosis, and people were dying around me, and they were being replaced by doppelgangers or robots, and I was being teased and tormented. I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't drink. They sectioned me while I was in the hospital. under the Mental Health Act. I was screaming at people, trying to attack them. I remember my good friend Grantley, who's the leader of our church, he came in to pray for my soul because they were told they were going to lose me again, and they very nearly did. And through the whole thing, through the torment and from the demons that were just out of view, there was this figure stood at the end of the bed, and it felt different to all the other figures that were there. There was this one doctor, a female Asian doctor, and she would come in, and I know that, like your hospitals in the US, that in certain parts of the US it's not a problem praying for people, and doctors talking about their faith, but it's illegal here. But I remember this one doctor, this young female Asian doctor, she had a cross on, and you're allowed to wear a cross when you work for the NHS, but it has to be covered. But she kept letting me see it, and then every time she'd see somebody come in, she'd put it away. And this, whatever it was at the end of my bed, I guess I just said, I can't deal with this anymore. I can't do this. I said, have you come to take me back to hell? And he's like, no, that's not why I'm here. You know who I am. And I said, you're Jesus. And he went, yeah. I said, well, what have I got to do in this? He said, look, you know what you've got to do. And I went, okay. Lord, I accept you into my life. And that darkness that I saw from my eyes, that graininess and all the darkness around, came light again. I was sat up in my bed. I hadn't done that in weeks. And this one nurse walked in, and she looked at me and she went white as she saw me sitting up in my bed. And I said, "Hi, can I have a wash, please?" And she went running out, and I could hear all the scarpering outside and doctors coming in and checking me, and they're like, "This is not right. You sat up." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I want to wash." I felt grotty and dirty. And there's this one medication that they'd given me that had given me an adverse reaction. I had a rash from my chin to my torso, and it was burning. It was a burning rash. I literally thought that they covered me with acid to torture me. And they brought this bowl in and a washcloth, and I started washing. As I was washing, this rash just began to peel away from my skin. I have doctors and nurses who will verify this. It just began to fall away from my skin, and miraculously it just disappeared. And I said, "I'm hungry." I hadn't eaten in weeks. They were shoving pipes up my nose and down my throat just to get anything in me, just to keep me alive.
Yeah, you probably had a feeding tube of some sort.
Yeah. I had to learn to eat again. I'd had these ulcers in my mouth that were really, really bad. So they gave me this medicine that covered my mouth that stopped the ulcers from hurting so I could eat. I'd had a job before I went into hospital. I'd started building my life back up. And while I was in the hospital, I got made redundant. I got £200. And the doctor said to me, "If you can get back up to 8 stone, you can go home."
And that's about how many pounds? I guess I should be Googling this right now.
Less than £100. I weighed less than £100.
This says a stone is 14 pounds. So you weighed how many stones?
6 stone, 6 ounces.
So that's 84 pounds. That is really skinny.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm 6'1".
Yeah, you were wasting away.
I was.
Before we talk about more of your recovery, I want to go back and hear a little bit more about hell. And when I talk to people that have had these wonderful experiences in the spirit world, I love all the details. I'm not asking you to do that here, except to tell us as much as you feel like. One of the things that most people feel in the spirit world is immense love, whether they see someone that they feel is God or a loved one or something else. They feel this immense, overwhelming love. Was your experience with hell the opposite of that?
Yeah. The true meaning of hell is without God. And God was, I didn't feel God there. It was dark. It wasn't a fiery inferno. It wasn't ashes and embers falling down and burning. It wasn't bridges of razor wire and things like that. It was exactly like our world, but emptier and darker. It was kind of like walking around a building at twilight, so it wasn't totally devoid of light. There was some light there, but it was like very dim. I could hear the taunts from what I presume were demons. I could hear the laughter of what I believed to have been just saying himself. I never saw him, but I heard him, and I never saw really the demons, but I heard them. I was kind of out of phase, a different frequency, so it was like I wasn't walking, but I wasn't floating. It was kind of going into different rooms. At one point, I could see myself in the bed. At one point, I could see the nurse's station outside of the room. I was in this thing called a negative pressure room, which is kind of, it helps you breathe better when you've got things like the pneumonia and tuberculosis and stuff. It was devoid of love. I truly felt that God wasn't there. And I kind of had a faith before I'd gone there. So I felt judged. I felt guilt, immense guilt and shame for some of the things that I'd done in my life. I felt guilt and shame for the way that I treated my parents. You know, I felt guilt and shame for when I was in prison, and I did it alone because I felt guilty and ashamed, and I couldn't tell my parents I was in prison. So I had all this just piling on and piling on and piling on. So I just felt like they were taking bits of my soul at a time until I had nothing left. And I felt truly soulless. It was towards like the end and before I started, breathing again, that it felt more ethereal. It felt like I've taken LSD in my time and magic mushrooms and stuff. It kind of felt a bit like that. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. There was no tunnel. All I can describe it as like old it kind of looked like old VHS. And, when I came out of it all and I started to get better, it then went back into sort of HD. That's the only way I can really describe it.
Yeah, like the color came back into the room and into the world.
Yeah, it became normal. It wasn't grainy. It wasn't dark. It was, I felt the sunlight coming through the window.
There has to be light to see color as well.
Yeah.
You thought about that? There's no color without light.
No. And I've heard people describe it as, being in the shadows. I describe it as outside of the periphery, outside of your peripheral vision, just outside. So it's there. It's kind of in a different phase, a different frequency. It's there, but you can't quite see it. And that's how I took the whole sort of thing. I still have flashbacks. I still have nightmares. It was a traumatic experience.
And then at one point you saw Jesus at the foot of your bed.
I did. He was at the foot of my bed. And he said, you know who I am. And he said, you know what you got to do? And I said, Jesus, I take you into my life.
Did you see him looking like a person, like some of the paintings maybe that we see of him?
No, he was like how I saw the specialists and the doctors. He was there, and I knew, but he was just outside of my line of sight. But when I did see, I saw this figure. It wasn't full-bodied, if you know what I mean. It was kind of transparent, but it definitely wasn't white Jesus that I was brought up to believe in. It wasn't the blonde hair, blue eyes. He was definitely an ethnic man, but it was more the love in his voice that that drew me more than anything. And I'm a logical man, but this was different. I would have described myself as an agnostic, not bright enough to be an atheist, but I knew that by accepting him back into my life, that was the only way I would ever get out of the hell that I was in, the living hell that I was in. And he gave me a new life. I was reborn in that bed that day.
And how is your life different now? This has been 8 years ago.
Yeah, nearly 9 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, it's been massively different. When I was, I guess, about 16, 18 months sober, I got asked by a friend who is a casting agent to go and speak to a director. The thing about the city of Norwich is that it's very big in the United Kingdom film business, second only to London. But they do a lot of filming over here. So things like Jack the Giant Killer was filmed here. Stardust was filmed here. Loads of other things have been filmed here. We've got 2 former RAF bases that are now film studios. And I was asked to go and speak to a director by the name of Joanna Hogg, who was making a film called The Souvenir, or 2 films, The Souvenir Part 1 and 2. And I was asked to go and speak to her because of the life that I'd led, because the film was about addiction. It was partly funded by Martin Scorsese, and I went to speak to Joe Hogg, and we had a chat. I was only initially going to give a little bit of advice and maybe a small part in the film. I ended up having a small part in the film and becoming consultant for both of the films. I had a cameo in the second film as well. I turned down a role in Jingle Jangle, which was filmed in Norwich, to go and work on part 2. In 16, 17, I wrote my first book, A Personal Apocalypse. And then 2017, I'd spent 6 months with escapees of human trafficking, sexual slavery and exploitation, and decided to write a book about it. And that helped me really look at my own trauma and know that I was trafficked, because I would never have thought I'd been trafficked. I just thought it was abuse. So I started working on my trauma. I'd had a relationship with my biological mum over the past sort of few years as well, and she passed away at the Easter of 2017. My sister was having a baby. She had the baby in June of 2017, and at 2 days old, my sister had quite a traumatic birth, so she was in bed sleeping. Her partner was looking after the baby. For some reason, he lost his temper, was unable to get the baby to sleep, and he beat her to death. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 10 years, but within 8 months, he was murdered by his cellmate over a £50 drug debt. So we were left with unanswered questions. Again, I'd started feeling hate and hurt, and it took a year before we could have the funeral. And one of the lead elders from our church, he took me home back to Yorkshire for the funeral. And we'd come out of the funeral, and back in the days when I smoked, and I lit a cigarette. And his mum came up to me and she put her arms around me. And she said, "Thanks for coming." And it broke me. And I started filling up with this anger, this hurt, this hate. So Chris took me back to the car, and I sat in the car, and I just broke, and I started to cry. And then I had there's this clarity that you only get when you're in pain. The clarity that you get when you're screaming and screaming and screaming, and you're really angry, and you hit something, and you hit it a bit too hard, and you know you've broken something, and this calmness just comes over you, and it snaps you straight out of it. Well, that's kind of how it happened in the car. And Chris looked at me and he said, "What's going on?" And I said, "I've got to forgive him." I said, "I've got to forgive him." I said, I can't do this." I said, "I hate him. And, I wanted him dead, but this is tearing me apart. I can't live like this anymore." So God's telling me I need to forgive him, not for him. But I knew that unforgiveness was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I said, I need to forgive him and I need to love him. You know, loving somebody doesn't mean that you like them in the biblical sense. I started this whole new journey of forgiveness. In 2020, I built a working relationship with the daughters of a gangland figure in a place called Salford, which is in the north of England. He was slain by a hitman in 2015. We needed these answers. So I helped them write a book. It took me quite a while to do because I was suffering with my mental health. So I worked on the book, and that's basically where I'm at.
Yeah, that's a whole lot. I appreciate you sharing. As we wind this down, let's just let people know. You were telling me earlier, you've been sober now for about 9 years.
Yep.
Congratulations. That's fantastic. I know you've got kids. You've got a nice family life.
I've got a great life.
What else is going on?
I get to occasionally play other people in TV and film. I get to regularly consult. Just about to finish book number 4. I'm working with escapees of domestic violence and telling their stories. I've got probably about a month and a half, and that'll be out. I have an audio book coming out from the first book, and I have a spoken word album coming out, which is just based on the poetry from the first book. I'm known as the accidental journalist. I help people speak their story. I work with a lot of miscarriages of justice, people that are serving time in prison for murders they did commit. I get a lot of people on to speak about their sobriety, like I'm doing with you now, to share their stories. I've sat and I've laughed with my guests. I've cried with my guests. And it's been a journey. It's been a massive journey. My daughter is about to do her GCSEs. You know, I've finished high school, so I'm feeling a little bit old right now. My stepson will be 17 in May, so that makes me feel even older. I like to do the occasional podcast where I'm speaking to other people because it helps keep myself grounded and it helps me use my voice. I'm a big member of my church. I'm training in ministry and teaching. I'm part of this thing called the School of Supernatural Life, which is basically we believe that, you know, God is supernaturally natural and naturally supernatural, and that we have gifts that he wants us to have, and he wants to give us things like prophecy and one word for other people. And, you know, it helps us give gifts to people and just bring a bit of hope back into people's lives with evangelism and stuff like that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing all of this with us today. If you think about that young man that you were a few years ago, where life was not in a good place, if that person were listening to you today, and there may be somebody out there that's feeling just like you did back then, what's your message of hope for him or her?
It might feel like it, but you're not alone. You are loved. You're loved by God. You're loved by me. I know it's going to get dark, and it does get darker before the light sets in. But just hold on to that hope, because it will get you through. You will get better. Things will get better. Relationships will get better, and you will begin to love yourself. That trauma that you're living in doesn't belong to you. Trauma is caused by other people. It doesn't belong to you. So let go and just ride it out, because there is a light and it is coming.
Wisdom from someone who's been there and has learned the hard way. Thanks for being with us today, Jack. Appreciate it.
Thank you, mate.
Thanks again for listening. We hope you will share this message with family and friends. To be notified when the next episode goes live, follow this show on your podcasting app or click over to roundtripdeath.com and sign up for our email newsletter. Until then, I wish you everything good that you're looking for in this life and the next.